What would you do if your father gave you control of his billion-dollar company and you couldn't run a basic staff meeting without people checking their phones or walking out early? 25-year-old Connor Hayes faced that exact nightmare for 6 humiliating months until Patricia Chun, a 63-year-old office clerk making $15 an hour, pulled him aside after another disastrous meeting and said, "I know why they don't listen to you, and I can teach you how to fix it in under 5 minutes." What Patricia revealed wasn't about confidence or charisma. It was a simple communication secret that transforms how people perceive authority, and it works whether you're running a corporation or leading a team meeting. This is the story of how wisdom from the mailroom saved a billion-dollar legacy. Connor Hayes had been groomed his entire life to take over Hayes Manufacturing, the industrial equipment empire his father built from nothing over 40 years. Connor had attended the best schools, earned an MBA from Wharton, completed internships at Fortune 500 companies, and theoretically had every qualification needed to lead. When his father suffered a stroke and could no longer actively run the company, Connor was appointed CEO at 25 with the board's reluctant agreement. On paper, he was ready. In reality, he was failing spectacularly, and everyone knew it. The most visible symptom of Connor's failure was his complete inability to run an effective meeting. Every Monday morning, he'd gather his leadership team, 15 executives with decades of combined experience, and attempt to lead a strategy session. Within 10 minutes, people would be checking their phones, having side conversations, or finding excuses to leave early. Connor would present ideas that were met with polite nods and zero follow-through. He'd ask questions that received minimal responses. He'd try to facilitate discussions that immediately died in uncomfortable silence. By the end of each meeting, Connor felt exhausted and humiliated while his team felt their time had been wasted by someone who clearly didn't command their respect. Connor tried everything his expensive education had taught him. He hired a corporate communication coach who taught him power poses and vocal projection. He read books on executive presence and charismatic leadership. He practiced his presentations obsessively, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. Nothing worked. The more he tried to perform leadership, the more obviously he was performing, and experienced executives who'd built their careers on actual achievement could smell the desperation. The company's performance began declining as leadership decisions were delayed or ignored, and board members started having quiet conversations about whether Connor should be replaced before he destroyed his father's legacy. The real problem, which Connor couldn't see but everyone else could, was that he was speaking in what Patricia later called rich kid language. Every sentence Connor spoke was hedged with qualifiers, softened with apologies, and undermined by his own unconscious verbal tics that signaled his lack of confidence and earned authority. He'd say things like, "I was thinking maybe we could possibly consider doing this, but I don't know. What do you guys think?" Or, "This might be a stupid question, but," or, "Sorry to take up your time, but." Every sentence broadcast that he didn't believe he belonged in the role. And if the person speaking doesn't believe in their own authority, why should anyone listening? Patricia Chun had worked at Hayes Manufacturing for 38 years, starting in data entry and eventually becoming the office clerk who handled mail distribution, supply orders, and the thousands of invisible tasks that keep organizations running. She'd watched 3 generations of Hayes family leadership, observed countless executives rise and fall, and developed an almost supernatural ability to read power dynamics and communication patterns. She'd been watching Connor's struggles with a mixture of sympathy and frustration, recognizing exactly what was sabotaging him because she'd seen it destroy other young leaders who had potential but lacked the specific communication skills that convey authority. After another disastrous Monday meeting where executives had barely hidden their eye rolls at Connor's uncertain presentations, Patricia approached him in the hallway. "Mr. Hayes, can I speak with you privately for just a moment? I think I can help." Connor, desperate for any guidance that might actually work, followed her to an empty conference room. Patricia got straight to the point. "You're sabotaging yourself with every sentence you speak. You're apologizing for existing, asking permission to lead, and broadcasting that you don't think you belong. Nobody will follow someone who doesn't believe in their own authority. But the good news is, this is fixable with a simple change that takes 5 minutes to learn and a few weeks to make habitual." Patricia explained what Connor had never been taught in his Ivy League education. Authority isn't just about knowledge or position, it's about how you speak. She broke down the specific verbal patterns that destroy credibility, minimizing language like just, maybe, and possibly. Constant apologies for things that don't warrant apology. Upspeak that makes statements sound like questions. Asking permission through phrases like, "Does that make sense?" or "What do you guys think?" after every decision. You're literally giving away your authority with every sentence, Patricia explained. You're inviting people not to respect you because you're signaling that you don't respect yourself. Then Patricia taught Connor the alternative, what she called declarative leadership language. Instead of, "I was thinking maybe we should possibly consider this strategy," say, "Here's the strategy we're implementing." Instead of, "Sorry to bother you, but I need this report," say, "I need this report by Friday." Instead of ending every statement with, "What do you think?" trust that if people disagree, they'll speak up without being invited to second-guess every decision. Patricia role-played with Connor for 30 minutes, having him practice delivering instructions, presenting strategies, and facilitating discussions using clear, direct, authoritative language that claimed his position rather than apologizing for it. Connor felt awkward at first. The new speech patterns felt aggressive and arrogant. But Patricia assured him, "You're not being arrogant. You're being appropriately confident. There's a massive difference, and everyone else can tell even if you can't yet." The following Monday, Connor walked into his leadership meeting with Patricia's voice in his head, instead of his usual hesitant opening. "So, thanks for coming. I guess we should maybe start?" He simply said, "Let's begin." First item is the Midwest expansion strategy. He presented his analysis and conclusion without qualifiers. "We're moving forward with the Cleveland facility. Tom, you'll lead the implementation team. Sarah, you're handling vendor contracts. I need your timelines by Wednesday." He didn't ask if that made sense or what they thought unless he genuinely wanted input on a specific decision point. When discussions veered off track, he redirected. "That's a separate issue we'll address later. Right now, we're focused on the facility timeline." The meeting ended 15 minutes early because decisions were actually made instead of endlessly discussed. The shift in the room was immediate and visible. Executives stopped checking their phones. Side conversations disappeared. When Connor spoke, people listened and responded with actual engagement rather than polite dismissal. The difference wasn't that Connor had suddenly gained years of experience or become smarter. The difference was that he'd stopped undermining himself with every sentence and started speaking like someone who believed he had the right to lead. One executive later told Patricia, "I don't know what happened to Connor over the weekend, but it's like he finally found his backbone. He's actually acting like a CEO now instead of cosplaying as one." Over the following months, Connor internalized Patricia's lessons, making authoritative communication his default rather than something he had to consciously perform. The company's performance stabilized as leadership decisions were made efficiently and followed through consistently. Board members stopped their whispered conversations about replacing him. Connor developed genuine confidence, not the performed confidence he'd tried to fake before, but the real thing that comes from knowing you can handle the responsibilities you've been given. He never forgot that the turning point came not from expensive consultants or leadership coaches, but from an office clerk who'd spent decades observing what actually works. Connor promoted Patricia to a newly created role, Executive Communication Advisor, with a salary reflecting the actual value of her expertise rather than just her previous clerical duties. She began training other young leaders in the organization, teaching them the communication patterns that convey authority and the verbal habits that destroy credibility. Her workshops became mandatory for all new managers, and the skills she taught, drawn from decades of observation rather than academic theory, transformed leadership effectiveness throughout the company. Connor's father, recovering from his stroke, told his son, "You did what I could never do. You recognized that wisdom exists at every level of the organization and you were humble enough to learn from it." That's real leadership. Connor Hayes' story reveals a truth that gets lost in most leadership training. Communication isn't just about what you say. It's about how you say it, and small verbal patterns can completely undermine or establish your authority. Patricia Chin recognized that Connor had all the knowledge and capability needed to lead, but he was sabotaging himself with unconscious speech patterns that broadcast insecurity. Her simple lesson, speak declaratively, eliminate apologetic and qualifying language, claim your authority with your words, changed everything because it addressed the actual problem instead of the symptoms. This story challenges all of us to examine our own communication patterns. How often do we apologize for things that don't warrant apology? How often do we qualify our statements with maybe and possibly when we actually mean something definite? How often do we ask permission to do things we have every right to do? These patterns feel polite and humble, but they communicate weakness and uncertainty. There's a balance between arrogance and appropriate confidence, and most people err too far towards self-deprecation that undermines their own credibility. The deeper lesson is about where wisdom lives. Patricia Chun was an office clerk making $15 an hour, someone Connor initially wouldn't have considered as a source of valuable business insight. But she'd spent nearly 4 decades watching leadership dynamics play out, developing expertise that no MBA program teaches. The people at every level of every organization have knowledge and perspective that's valuable if leaders are humble enough to listen and learn. Connor's real transformation wasn't just learning to speak authoritatively. It was learning to recognize expertise wherever it exists regardless of job title or salary. If you're in a leadership position and struggling to command respect, examine your verbal patterns. Record yourself in meetings and listen for the qualifiers, apologies, and permission-seeking phrases that undermine your authority. If you're someone with valuable knowledge but a position that others overlook, be like Patricia, share what you know when you see someone struggling, because your experience matters even if your title doesn't reflect it. And if you're building any kind of organization, remember that wisdom exists at every level if you're willing to look for it and listen when it's offered. Like and subscribe for more stories about unexpected teachers and simple secrets that transform performance. Comment about communication habits you've recognized in yourself or lessons you've learned from unlikely sources. And remember, authority isn't just given by title or position. It's claimed and communicated with every word you speak. Make sure your words match the leadership you're trying to provide.